All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rise of Justice Movement, the podcast. My name is Zachary Mallory, and I am the founder and the host of the Rise of Justice Movement and the Rise of Justice Movement, the podcast. Today, I'll give a viewer discretion is advised due to the nature of the topics that we will be discussing. All right, y'all. Whenever I tell you today's guest is an absolute powerhouse in the survivor world, in the human being world, in just this whole like aura that this human being brings is one of the absolute most beautiful things. And this person means a lot to me. But before we get to our very special guest today, I would like to introduce, and you've seen her in a lot of our social media videos, like literally. My badass co-founder Gwen is joining me today as the co-host and will be the main interviewer of our special guest, which Gwen will introduce here in just one moment. But Gwen, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm good. Anytime we get to do podcasts together and interview an amazing person who inspires us and our movement is just it's a joy. So I'm happy to be here.
This
Beyond
human
happy.
this human being sparked a movement, and it's
Yes,
definitely
yes, they did.
like I'm tearing up. I literally am. Like, if anybody's watching this video form, you can literally see me tearing up. But obviously, if you're listening on audio, you can't see that. But I'm literally shaking. I'm sweating because this has been a long time in the making. And I can't tell you how I feel right now because honestly, I don't know. But it's such a good feeling. It's that overwhelming feeling. This is like whenever we were interviewing like Jess Michaels, I was also sweating.
Oh
Luckily,
yeah.
we were off camera because I was like, okay, I can't show this. I gotta be self. But I've looked up to Jess for a very long time, just like our guest today. Um, but without further ado, Gwen, I'm gonna pop it over to you, and feel free to obviously, like do a reintroduction. It's been a little bit since you've been on like the actual podcast side. We do a weekly show now, which I'm really excited about. We cover a lot of
Mm.
political topics. We talk about, breaking news, breaking headlines. We are going to be filming that episode later this week. We got a lot to talk about. There's a lot that has happened this week.
Oh yeah.
But before we get to that, feel free to reintroduce yourself because we did an episode with you too. And it feels like an eternity ago, but it was
I
just last
know. The very
August.
first episode. Yeah, that's wild.
And and then we had Lindsay Boylan, and then there's like 90 something more now, and there's hundreds more to come. I can already feel it. But feel free to reintroduce yourself for those who may not know who you are, and then I'll have you introduce our very, very special guest today.
Well, hello to our listeners. I'm Gwen Levy. I'm one of the co-founders of Rise Above Justice Movement, musician and activist, and a survivor myself. And we are so honored and excited, if you can already tell, to introduce Sarah Ann Masse. And Sarah is an LA-based bisexual and invisibly disabled actor, writer, singer, producer, filmmaker, and comedian who was one of the first people to come forward about Harvey Weinstein. So, Sarah, we are so happy to have you here. And, how are you doing today?
Hey, hi, I'm so happy to be here. I'm doing as well as any human being can be doing in April of 2026.
It's been a wild month. It has
It's
been a wild
been a
month.
month. It has been.
Yeah.
But I'm
Yeah.
happy to be
And
with both of you.
and it's also Sexual Assault Awareness Month too,
Yes.
which
If we are not all aware of sexual assault right now, I don't know what we are doing because it is everywhere. It is in the news everywhere, as it should be, because even when mainstream media is not talking about the prevalence of sexual violence, those of us who have experienced sexual violence know that it is everywhere all the time. And it's very difficult to have it centered in the press like this. I think it's very activating for people,
Yeah.
can be anyway, but I think it's also very, very important that we're finally, not starting to have these conversations, continuing to have these conversations, because we know how the news cycle works. We focus on it, it goes away. We focus on it, it goes away. But for the world, for the people experiencing it, it does not go away. So I'm grateful we're talking about it, but I'm also, you know, sensitive and tender and fired up and enraged and all the things that I think all of us are right now.
And that's so well said. And literally, you're taking the thoughts right out of my head, but and the feelings I've had in my heart, just with everything coming out in the news. And um, Sarah, I want to start just like you have so many gifts, which is so evident, And I want to start at the very beginning, and I want to talk about your background, what growing up was like for you, and what really led you to where you are today, just being this multi-talented artist.
Oh, wow. Oh, goodness. I, both of my parents were actors. They met in college. They were both in the acting program, and they don't do that anymore. They stopped that part of their life a long time ago, but I was lucky to grow up in a household that was very creative and was very supportive of being creative. I think I started singing before I started speaking, and my parents would play like show tunes and 80s new wave and 90s pop and like the Beatles and oldies, and like I was exposed to everything. We were in a house where they were not anti-television, which I was really grateful for. I feel like I learned a lot from television. I feel like I was exposed to a lot of different ideas and people and cultures. And I feel like I learned a lot from like PBS, but also from sitcoms and everything. And so it was just a very fun, playful, creative household. And I started by dancing. I started doing ballet when I was 4. And then I did like school plays. And I was always very frustrated because I wanted to be the lead, but I would always get cast as like the narrator because I was a really good reader and I was a really good public speaker. And then I started singing in choir. And so I had all these like fun, but then I also, played soccer and was a Girl Scout, and I did kind of everything. My parents just allowed me to figure out what I was most interested in, and it became very clear very quickly. I think I also wrote my first play when I was like 9 years old. And it's funny because for a very long time I did not think of myself as a writer, but if you look back at my life, I would like write a play, I'd write a monologue, I wrote an article for a high school yearbook that I didn't even go to. And, I was always finding ways to express myself. I see Zachary laughing. It's because I started homeschooling when I was in 5th grade, and I did a lot of theater at an all boys high school. And I became kind of adopted into the community to the point where they asked me to write for the yearbook. So, I just had that kind of background, and it allowed me to, I think, express myself in ways that were really important. I got bullied a lot as a kid. I had a tough time. I had a lot of health issues that we didn't really understand until I was older. And so I think childhood could have been really, really tough, and was in a lot of ways. But I was lucky to have parents who were really supportive and really loving. And it wasn't just about creativity either. It was about, asking questions and, questions about religion, questions about like, I think I staged a protest on my front yard when I was like 4 years old. Who knows which war it was at this point? Like America's been at war for so long. And they just, they helped me make my sign, and they let me march around in circles by myself. It was a very open environment like that. So that's kind of how I started in terms of being outspoken and being creative. I think it was just allowed, it wasn't stamped out of me. Even though when I was in school and like the people around me tried to stamp it out of me, when I went home, I always had that kind of nurturing environment. And I think that was really important. And then when I was probably about 14 or 15, I read a book by a terrible man called David Mamet. But it was an excellent book called True and False, and it's about acting and directing. And I read the book that his theater company wrote called Practical Aesthetics, which was like an acting method. And I decided at 14 or 15 that I did not want to go to college. that I wanted to become a professional actor. And the reason I didn't want to go to college is I knew I wanted to go to the Atlantic Theater Company acting school. And you could do that through NYU, but NYU costs $4 billion a year. And I did not grow up with money. Or I could just go train at their conservatory, at their acting school. So I came up with a whole plan and pitched it to my parents. And they went, we're in support of that. If in a couple of years you still feel like you don't want to go to college, that's okay. You don't want to take the SAT, you don't have to do that. And they like held to their word. And I didn't. I went and I uh, started training at Atlantic when I was 18. I was in their part-time professional program, which I was the youngest person that had ever been admitted at that time. And I got into the Williamstown Theater Festival and I did that. And then I moved to New York and I just knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be an actor more than anything. I ended up doing a lot more than that, but that was my trajectory. And, you know, funnily enough, funny in an ironic way, that's sort of where I converge with Harvey. Is very shortly after I moved to New York and start my own theater company and start my very big, exciting life. And it took a big detour after that.
We have a lot of similarities, just like the way we grew up. And I wasn't homeschooled, but I was an only child, so I also was writing and singing and all these things. And I wrote a play too. I think I was like 9, so that was kind of wild
That's so
to hear that. Yeah. And yeah, and then also the Atlantic School. I remember I went to college and majored in theater. So I remember that was a lot of people went to that school, and it's so cool that you were one of the youngest. You were the youngest person at the time to ever be
yeah,
admitted. So I mean that
I was
says a
very
lot, you know?
surprised. They told me they were like,
Yeah.
"You're welcome to apply, but we're probably not." And something similar happened to me actually where I grew up. I was like I said, I was homeschooled and I was part of this really cool homeschool group and we did all sorts of things together. And one of the things was like a Shakespeare play once or twice a year. And I'm not kidding you, there were like 4 and 5 year olds doing Shakespeare and
Oh, that's
understanding it. And it was amazing. And there was a
mhm.
local acting class and there were like 4 teenagers in it, but it was all adults. And my director from the Shakespeare plays was in it. And he said, I want you to meet the teacher. I think you would love the class. And again, the teacher was like, you can do a monologue, but I don't think that's gonna happen. But then they let me in. So I got to do all these great things where I think really young, I got a lot of experience and a lot of exposure to people who were better than me. And I think that's a big theme for me is I never want to be the most talented person in the room. I never want to be the most experienced person in the room. I never want to be the smartest person in the room. I never want to assume that I'm any of those things. Like I want to surround myself by people who are different from me and have different skills and different experiences and who I can learn from. And I feel the same way about advocacy. I assume every person I talk to has something to teach me. And I want to be a better person 5 years from now than I am now. Like I like to think I'm doing pretty good and I'm open and I'm not defensive and everything, but I know I'm going to look back and go, oof, you still had a lot to learn. Like that's how I want my whole life to be. I just want to constantly be learning and getting better.
I think that's such a beautiful way to look at life. And I too, myself, and we'll get into your survivor story just in just a moment here. But as a survivor myself, I feel like after the trauma, like my trauma started really young and I never was fully living, I feel like, until I started really getting this trauma therapy until recently. And I love what you said because the same thing, I want to surround myself with people who inspire me and aren't like me. I mean, like-minded, but
Yeah.
also people who challenge me and make me want to be a better person and live life to the fullest. So I'm really happy you said that. So with that being said, and I know this is not the first time you've told your story, especially with what happened with Harvey Weinstein, but if we could start there. Um, so as a survivor, Sarah, if you could speak about your experience, you said you went to acting school and you got to New York when you were 18, correct?
I started training in New York when I was 18 and yeah, I lived in New York at this time and I was an actor. I started this is a few years later. I started a theater company with my friends and I worked as a nanny and I did like all the things. New York is very expensive, as I think everybody is aware. And so I nannied for this incredible family. They had 2 kids and They were normal people, they weren't like rich billionaires or anything like that. And I worked for them during the week, but I really needed more money. So I had reached out to a few nannying agencies trying to find some like higher paid weekend nannying work. And this is part of the story. I don't know if I've told this part, but there was this weird thing about the nannying agency where when I went in to interview, it was sort of this thing of like, well, we really only typically hire people who have a college degree, but we really think our clients will like you. You're well spoken, you're the right kind of type. And even at the time, I was like, yo, dog whistles, dog whistles, dog whistles. Like, I think that they wanted me because I was white, to be honest with you, and like quote unquote well spoken. And that rubbed me the wrong way. But I also was like, well, their attitude doesn't matter. What matters is me going in there and being my authentic self and finding a family who appreciates me and who I can help. So I'm going to go in with an open mind to these interviews. And this time is a little fuzzy, the timeline, just because trauma makes things difficult to access memory wise. I think I had gone on a few interviews already. And I was reached out to by the agency and they said, we think we found a family that's like perfect for you. They work in entertainment. And so we know you understand that world. Very high profile. It's a producer named Harvey Weinstein. And I mean, obviously I knew who that was. For anybody, I mean, maybe some people don't know, but before he was arrested, he was the most powerful, influential independent producer working in the entertainment industry. He essentially invented the Oscar campaign as we know it now. He was thanked more than God in Oscar speeches. And, so I knew who he was. And I think everybody assumes that we all knew he had this reputation with women. I did not know that. I was a very young, very new actor. I was really focused on theater. I had only done theater really, except for like a couple of short films and things. And when I moved to New York, I thought, oh, I'm gonna look for an agent. I'm gonna start trying to do film and TV. And I was doing that. I was starting to do that. The only thing I knew is that he sort of had a reputation for being maybe kind of like a bully, like a tough boss, kind of like a mean guy. Um, but I wasn't so worried about that because my experience had been that like people are one way at work and then another way at home. And so I thought, okay, yeah, I'll do this interview. And it was weird too because I didn't actually meet with him first. I had several breakfast meetings with two of his female assistants who were probably not much older than me at the time. And they were really nice and very friendly and like, asked me a lot of questions about myself and said, we want someone who understands the entertainment industry, but we don't want someone who's going to be like trying to use this to get ahead and with their own career and will, understand discretion. He has a lot of famous friends and if he has people over. And I said, yeah, actually, I mean, I have a very bright line between the work I do as a nanny and my other work. I had worked and even just like babysitting for a lot of families who were actors and things. And that was not a problem for me. So after a few of those interviews, I was asked if I would go to his house in Connecticut. And I grew up in Connecticut and like, so my car was still at my parents' house. So I went back to Connecticut and I got in my car and I drove to his house in Westport and I'd driven those roads 1,000 times. Not to his house. He lived in a mansion, but like I knew exactly where I was going. And it's very funny because I remember the whole drive there. And also just like for clarity's sake, Harvey is not the only person to ever abuse me. 2 months prior to being assaulted by Harvey, I was raped by a peer who I thought was my friend. And I think the first time I experienced any kind of sexual assault or harassment was probably, well, no, probably like 10 was the first time I was touched against my will, but without consent by a boy in my class. I think, people had definitely said all those creepy things that people say to little girls before that, like, oh, she's gonna have all the boys. Like to me, all of that stuff is sexual violence. And also even my parents, like I really loved clothes and like all sorts of different things. And we went to a secondhand shop. I would always get hand-me-downs, but I saw like this cute little knit two-piece set that was kind of like maybe a little bit of my belly showed. And it was a skirt. And my mom was like, yeah, you can buy that when we have the money if it's still here, but you can only really wear it at home. And I didn't understand at the time, but later I understood. So like, I just want it to be clear, just because somebody talks about a particular experience or a particular abuser, it's usually not the only one. So, but I went into this very confident and comfortable. I mean, nervous because it's a big interview, but I wasn't worried. In hindsight, I was supposed to babysit for a family in New York, and I had to tell them I have a big job interview. So I'm sorry I can't babysit. I'm going to be in Connecticut. And the dad asked me, "Oh, who are you interviewing with?" And I said, "Harvey Weinstein." And when I was doing discovery for my trial, I went back and was looking through things, and he said to me in an email, "Careful, he's a terror." And I wish he had been more specific, and I wish I had realized that and I just went, oh yeah, he's a bully. Okay. Also, don't forget, every time I've gone on an interview for a nannying job, the kids are there. The parents are like both parents. Now he was divorced. This was for his kids from his first marriage, but I assumed his new wife would be there. Like I walked in assuming it was just going to be business as usual. And when I got to the house, there's a huge gate. And tell me if I'm giving too much detail about this, you can pull me back. But
Not at all. Yeah.
okay, there's a huge gate. And also, just so everyone knows, like I'm squeezing this little mochi squeezy bisexual sheep. Like even though I've been talking about this publicly for 9 years now, almost, I still get activated talking about it. And if I feel too activated, I will stop it. Like I'm saying this out loud because I want to advocate for other people to be able to do the same. But I see this huge gate and you have to buzz in and it's mechanical and you drive in and I'm not kidding, like a mile away from any other neighbors. You go up this big long driveway and you park and you walk up to this huge house and there's a huge door. So I park, I get out, I walk up to the door and he opens the door and he opened the door in an undershirt and boxers. And I was like, I just felt embarrassed. Like, oh my gosh, he must have forgotten that it was an interview. This is so awkward. And I sort of assumed like he would be like, I'm so sick. Just give me 1 minute. I'm so sorry. But he went, oh, hi, come on in, right? And so we came in and I'm still thinking, okay, well, he's gonna give me somewhere to sit down, then he's gonna go excuse himself and come back. That's not what happened. I walk in, it seems like the house is empty. Like I don't see anybody else. I don't hear anybody else. We sit down. I I like make sure to sit down not on the same piece of furniture from him. Like I sit across on I don't remember if it was a couch or an armchair and there was like a table and then he was sitting somewhere else. And he was not seeming like he was going to leave to go get changed. And so your brain does this thing when something unusual is happening. At least my brain does. And a lot of other people I've talked to is like it tries to make sense of it. So my brain is going, well, this is weird. I guess this is like one of those weird, like quirky Hollywood things where he's just like so comfortable and like, okay, I'm just gonna keep my eyes up here and try to be as professional as possible. And it was very disconcerting because he was behaving like everything was completely normal and asking me normal, like get to know you interview questions, being friendly. Um, and it started out normal. It started out asking me like, "Oh, how was your drive?" and tell me about your experience with nannying. And then what was weird is he started asking me, I mean, not just obviously it's already weird, but he started asking me about my acting. And I thought it was unusual because I was told over and over and over again, like, don't talk about your acting. You're not there as an actor, right? And I had no intention of doing so. So I would try to just like quickly, politely answer and pivot back to what we were talking about. But he seemed really interested. And at one point, he asked me for like my headshot and resume. And I had a bag that I would bring to interviews, I'd bring to auditions. So I had it in my stuff. And I sort of like didn't address it at first, but he kept asking. And I was like, yes, I have one. And he's like, okay, give it to me. He's like looking at my credits and looking at my picture. It's very strange. Still no sign of children, no sign of his wife, nothing. And at a certain point, two kids run in. And I start to feel relieved because the longer I'm there and the longer he's still in his underwear and the longer he's asking me questions not about the job interview, the more my brain is having a hard time convincing me that I'm not in a dangerous situation. So the kids run in, I breathe a sigh of relief, and he changes from being like friendly and even kind of charming to enraged. He is screaming at his children to leave the room. Do not come back. You do not come back. As long as she is here, you stay out of this room. You leave us alone. And it was then that I knew I was not safe. And I start thinking about like, what happens if I try to leave? And I think it's a while, it's like kind of a while to get to the door. And then I have to get out of the door. And then will I get to my car before he grabs me? And even if I get to my car, I don't think I can get out. I don't control this gate. So I'm just thinking, okay, just get through it, stay safe, just try to get through it. And again, fuzzy, don't remember everything that was said, but I remember at one point he started asking me if I would ever flirt with his famous friends to get ahead in my acting career. He starts asking me if I would use sex to get ahead. He's leaning over the table, like making like lascivious faces at me. And I emphatically say, no, absolutely not. I'd never do that for anything. And I think at some point it feels like it's wrapping up. And I think, okay, maybe I'm going to get out of this now. And we stand up and he goes to what I think is shake my hand. So I go to shake his hand and he yanks me like really hard. He doesn't know this. I didn't even know it at the time, but I know what to call it at the time, but I have a connective tissue disorder. So when he yanks me, he injures my shoulder, he injures my neck. He pulls me in for this hug. Remember, he's in his boxer shorts and he's like 6'1", 6'2", something like that. Definitely over 200 pounds. I'm 5'6". I'm like a buck 40, maybe if I'm lucky. I'm a lot smaller than him. Um, and he grabs me and now he's pushing me against his genitals and holding me there. And I'm frozen, like stiff as a board, can't move, terrified. I don't know if it was 10 seconds. I don't know if it was 10 minutes. But while he's pushing me up against his crotch and has me pinned to his body, he whispers in his ear that he loves me. And then he lets me go and walks me to the front door. And the last thing I remember is looking down at my feet walking on the driveway. I have no memory of driving back to my parents' house. I like come to in the middle of talking to my mom. I'm mid conversation and she's asking me about the interview and I start talking and explaining what happened and I see her face fall. And I realize that like, okay, this isn't just me. What happened was horrifying. And I don't I don't think it ever occurred to either of us to go to the police at that point. I don't I mean, in hindsight, I don't know what it would have done. I've gone to the police about other things and nothing came of it. Um, I remember her asking me if I thought I would take the job if it was offered to me. And I said, I don't want to. I need money, but I don't want to. I don't feel safe. And a very interesting thing happened. I forgot to mention this detail. One of the assistants was supposed to be there. And I think it was the night before, the morning of, I got an email saying, I'm not going to be able to be there, but let me know how it goes after. So it was like a bait and switch. I don't blame them at all. I'm sure they were dealing with their own levels of abuse. I've heard from, women who worked from him, even if they weren't sexually assaulted, they were harassed, they were verbally assaulted, they didn't feel safe. But it was like a honeypot. It was a trap. And I heard from her after, and she said, he thought you were great. He loved you. And I was like, whoa, gosh, there's that word again. But he just really doesn't want an actor. So sorry. And I thought, well, that's bullshit. He didn't like that I said no so emphatically to his, barely hidden propositions, and that I froze up like and I don't know. I think for a while I told myself I was lucky that like worse didn't happen. And again, I think that was my brain trying to like just get me through it and not have to think about it. And I didn't tell anyone other than my immediate family. All my friends in my theater company were like, how'd it go? How'd it go? One of my best friends, I had an email from her asking me about it. And she told me in retrospect, like when we were going through discovery for the trial, she's like, I always thought it was really weird that you wouldn't talk about it, but I didn't want to push you. So I didn't know what happened, but I knew something was off. And it was this awful thing where it ruined my life because I stopped looking for an agent. I stopped feeling safe going on auditions. I was lucky that I had my theater company because I trusted those people. And so I kept having a creative outlet with people I trusted in independent theater, but really I thought I can't walk into a room and have him be there. I can't walk into a room and have someone like him be there. What if I audition for a project and I get it and then I find out he's producing it? Like I just completely cut my very promising career off at the knees because I couldn't bear to be assaulted again by someone like him or by him. And it was devastating because I started way earlier than anybody else. And that was my whole plan. I didn't want to go to college because I wanted to be ahead. I wanted to be getting those jobs when other people were still in school. And I lost that time. And it didn't only impact my acting career. Every other nannying interview I went on from there on out, I like sent my mom the address. I called her while I was walking up to the house. I told her, like, if you don't hear from me within a half an hour, an hour, call me. I was just terrified that this was going to happen to me again in that environment. And it cost me work, it cost me money, it cost me time. Eventually, I met the person who would become my husband. And we started writing comedy together and producing comedy together. And I finally started trying to do film and TV again. But I had lost so much time, years of my life. And even then, when we first lived in LA, when we were engaged, he couldn't work. He's from England. He didn't have his work visa yet. And I was trying to find a nannying job. And I was interviewing with this woman who had one son, and we were going to her house in Los Feliz, this big, beautiful house. And my husband drove me, and I said, if you haven't gotten a text from me in 10 minutes that I'm safe, come to the front door. She was lovely. And I felt totally safe to the point where I forgot to text him. So he came to the door. And luckily, she was very understanding. I didn't tell her what had happened. I said, I had a bad experience once. And and she was like, totally get it. But this lived with me for 9.5 years until October 11th, 2017. And I didn't tell anybody outside my immediate family. And it impacted every day of my life. Every award season, I would like pretend it wasn't there. I'd pretend it wasn't a problem, and his face would be there in the audience at the Oscars. Or some of my favorite movies, Shakespeare in Love. Like I said, I went to the Williamstown Theater Festival. Gwyneth Paltrow went to the Williamstown Theater Festival. That's how I found out about it. And every time that logo came up, whether it was Miramax or the Weinstein Company, I felt physically ill. And it still happens today. If I watch, like I was going to watch Paddington with my family, and I didn't realize that it was one of his production companies. I can't remember now if it was Miramax or the Weinstein Company. It doesn't matter that like Miramax isn't his anymore. It came up and I like had to have a panic attack for 20 minutes before we could watch the movie so I could get through it.
And there's
And
so many movies I see now that I love. Again, like favorite movies that I'm like, Harvey Weinstein, Bob Weinstein's his brother, right? Like the
yep,
Weinstein. Yeah, it's like, wow, just owning Hollywood. So,
yep.
oh my gosh. Yes, but continue. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what else there is to say other than the fact that I chose to tell my story publicly without ever thinking I would because of a few reasons. So when the New York Times story came out, it came out like in two pieces in 1 week. I was in Europe. Like I said, my husband's from the UK. We were visiting family, but I was also prepping to film a short film that I had written and that I was co-directing, that I was co-starring in. And the day before I I saw both stories. And it was the first time I realized that I was not the only one he had done this to. I had no idea.
Yeah.
And I felt sick. And I felt, as maybe it's going to sound bad, I felt relief. I felt
Yeah.
somehow like it wasn't my fault, which is a ridiculous, like, I know it wasn't my fault. I know I did nothing wrong. I did everything right. And there's nothing anyone can do to prevent this from happening other than the people who do it. But it was this very strange experience. And I decided I was going to like post on Facebook so my 3,000 friends at least could see. And it was never going to be a fully detailed thing. Like I even for like as I was writing it, I was like, oh wait, I remember this now. Oh wait, I remember this now. Because that's the thing too, is like I wasn't actively bringing it to the front of my mind. I was trying so hard to suppress it. And a
Yeah.
friend of mine saw what I posted and messaged me and said, hey, look, I have a friend who's a journalist and she's looking to talk to survivors of Weinstein. Would you be willing to talk to her? And I really didn't want to talk to the press, but I agreed to talk to her off the record. And I was there in like a guest bedroom at my in-laws' house in the UK, talking to LA and telling this story. And while I told the story, I started talking about what happened to me 2 months prior. And I went, whoa, hold on, hold on, hold on. I don't want to talk about that. That's off the record. You can't say his name. Still haven't said his name publicly. Um, and I told her she could do it. And I told her it was an exclusive. And then I started getting messages from the BBC and from all these other places. And I was literally like prepping for this shoot, juggling, talking to the press. I was like between takes the next day, sitting in a car, like doing radio interview. It was very, very strange. And nobody prepared me for what it would be like. I had no media training. I had no support. I mean, I had like support. My family was like, we love you, we support you, but there was nothing tangible, right? And
Absolutely.
Inside Edition like lied about, I told them, I told everybody, and I still haven't to this day. I'm like, I'm not talking about my age. I'm not talking about any of that. And they made up an age and like, and to their credit, when I contacted them, the producers had it pulled down and like re-edited it. But there was so much about coming forward too that was kind of traumatic and difficult because nobody prepares you for that. And I'd say like the first month and a half, thank God I was filming this movie. And my crew was so incredible. I have one scene where like I walk down a dark alley and there's somebody who I think is following me. And I felt like it could have been really activating. And my first AD stood at the end of the long place and was like there for me and like made sure I felt safe. And they just really took care of me. And it felt poetic that I was making my own movie at the same time I was talking about this man who stole my career. And that felt really empowering. And the first month and a half, even though it was really difficult and really triggering and traumatizing, largely felt like, okay, I'm meeting these other survivors, I'm building community. Um, but then it was like the headlines would come out and it was Weinstein survivor this and Weinstein survivor that. And I didn't realize right away, but like I was losing my identity. My name was being stripped away. Later, when I had announcements in the trades about my work, it was still Weinstein survivor this and Weinstein survivor that. And it's like, I don't, that is part of my story. That's part of my identity, but use my name. Like what's going on here? And then about a month and a half in, I got a call from my agent and the first words out of her mouth were, you better watch your back. And I said, excuse me? And she said, I know you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. I know you can't untell this story, but you have to stop talking about this. You have to stop. I'm getting angry phone calls from casting directors. You're being blacklisted. You're ruining your career. And like this was I didn't say this. One of the reasons I stayed quiet was I was terrified that he was going to ruin not just my career, but my life. He had all the power and all the money, and I had none. And so my biggest fear was that my career would be ruined by what he did to me. My career would be ruined if I spoke out. My career had already been ruined by what I call implicit retaliation, which was me holding myself back due to fear because of what he did. Then suddenly, when I came forward publicly, it was explicit retaliation. And I thought, this is her. This is her trying to control the narrative. I'm not going to be afraid. It's going to be fine. And then I had been in LA for about a year at this point, and I had a very small agency that I was signed with, but I was auditioning like, 4 to 6 times a month, which I felt really good about being in a new market, not being well known. I had like 3 or 4 auditions over the course of years after that. And I had her, there's this thing called submission reports where your agent or your manager can send you a document showing what they submitted you for and how frequently and everything. She had not stopped submitting me. I mean, she was submitting me maybe even more frequently than she had been, and just nobody was bringing me in. And it's 9.5 years later, and my career still has not recovered. Um, I feel embarrassed by it some of the time. I haven't had an audition in, I don't know, a year at this point, which is, I like, guys, I was in She Said, this huge Universal movie. I had a major supporting role. The producer submitted me for Oscar consideration. Like that ballot that goes out, the first ballot, my name is on it. And they only can submit 8 actors. They did not submit all the actors in the film. They submitted me. I won an AFI award. I won a Movies for Grown-ups award. I'm attached to a Broadway bound musical. I'm good at what I do, and I can't get an audition, let alone work.
And
Um,
that's wild to hear to this day.
mhm.
And he is obviously guilty.
Yeah.
The trial has happened. That Hollywood is still blacklisting you in some ways.
Yeah, and I think, like after a certain point, it becomes less explicit. It's just like, oh, we haven't seen her in a while. Oh, I'm not on the radar. And it's not even intentional. It's just because I'm not on the radar. And, I auditioned for a really, really big movie last year, and with one of the most amazing, well-respected comedy casting directors. Like Francine Maisler cast me, and She Said, and she's one of the most well-respected drama casting directors. And this casting director loved my audition, sent me to the director and studio as her first choice. I'm not saying I didn't get it because of the Harvey. I don't think that's what happened with that. But like,
Mm,
you know, they went a very different direction. It's totally fine. But my point is like not to be like, oh, I'm so great. My point is to say when you wonder where people go, when you wonder, oh, what happened to that actress? What happened to that singer? It's most of the time it's stuff like this.
yeah,
And I'm not going to let that be my story. I have movies that I'm making. Like I've got a script called Mother Trucker with Amber Ruffin attached and great producers. And that short film, Tristan and Kelly, that I was shooting, I've turned it into a feature and I've got producers attached to that. And we have a distributor interested and we're just trying to find, the rest of our talent attachment. Like I'm not going anywhere, guys. Like I'm not going.
yeah.
I just filmed a Christmas movie in San Diego this a couple of months ago. I'm still working. I've still got stuff going on, but there is this very real thread where it becomes so much harder to just have your life. And mine is in the entertainment industry, but this kind of abuse, whether it's one situation or repeated situations, one abuser, multiple abusers, it has very real, lasting, long-term harm and trauma. It is not just the incident itself, it is how it impacts every part of your life. My physical health, like I have chronic illnesses and disabilities that I am certain I would not have had I not been through this experience. Like you might have a genetic predisposition, but like trauma, there are certain things that have to happen to turn it on. It might be a car accident, it might be a divorce, it might be being sexually assaulted. So many of my survivor friends have autoimmune disorders, chronic illnesses, cancer. There's been a
Yeah.
lot of research into how trauma triggers autoimmune conditions. So it impacts your physical health, it impacts your mental health, your emotional health, it impacts your career, it impacts your finances, it impacts your interpersonal relationships. And this is a big deal. And I refer to it as a public health crisis. This is not some like, oh, these ladies need to grow tougher skin or that guy's got to get over it. No, this is a public health crisis. It is widespread. It is destructive. It also causes economic harm to communities when it happens. This is a big deal. And it is not some like salacious thing that you read about in the newspaper and then you put down newspaper, like we're in 1972, but like, you read about online and then you move on. It's serious and it is wide ranging. And it's why I decided to do something about it beyond just
Yeah.
trying to heal through my own life. I decided to do something broader and bigger and hopefully very transformative.
Yeah. And I mean, again, everything you're saying is, even though our experiences are different, it's very relatable. And um, yeah, I'm blown away, first of all, by your strength. Thank you so much for sharing your story because I know it just never gets easier to do that. So thank you for, sharing that with our listeners. And, I think hearing all this is going to help a lot of people. It's helping me. And you said how you felt relief when you found out there was other survivors. I mean, I felt that way, just being part of Rise Above Justice movement and meeting people like Zachary, and of course, hearing your story and so many. It's so sad how common these things are and the powerful people who take advantage of these things. Um, and when you talk about not being able to get work, again, our stories are different, but like I related to that because I wrote my pro-choice country anthem, Barefoot and Pregnant, because I'm a survivor. And I've had doors closed on me in the country music industry here. Like it's just doors are never going to open for me there. And I don't want to say never, I'm sure you're kind of in the same way. You don't want to say never. But yeah, it's just like I
There are
understand
there are certain doors that are never going to open for you.
certain doors,
Yeah.
not all of them. And I think I just relate so much to what you said because everything being a survivor, it's as our friend Jess Michaels, who's an Epstein survivor, says, the trauma, um, it, our wounds are invisible, but and people don't often think of survivors like, oh, you have an injury because you're not bleeding out in hospital bed. Some people are, of course, unfortunately, but the damage is lasting, and having developed mental health issues, physical issues, um, even being spiritually disconnected because of the trauma, that's also relatable. And everything you said, again, I just thank you. And I think going off of that, um, maybe if you could tell our listeners kind of, dealing with the trauma, how did you go about your healing journey in terms of like, what would you tell a survivor who's first trying to start theirs based on your own healing journey? Like, what is some advice you would give,
Yeah.
if you could share?
Well, one of the first things I did, like I said, having this film to make was a godsend. Like, I don't know if I would have gotten through that first week without that. One of the first things I did after coming forward was the very first thing I wrote after coming forward was this sketch. So my husband and I have a sketch comedy duo called We Are Masse, and I love doing it. It's very joyful. And I wrote this sketch that I called Christmas Crime, and you can see it online. You can look it up. And it sort of opens with like me sitting on an armchair. It's a Christmas tree, lovely little scene, sipping hot cocoa. And all of a sudden, a guy just walks through my front door, and I look startled. And he starts like taking stuff, and I was like, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And one of the first things he says is, "Oh, come on. I saw that welcome mat. I saw those lights twinkling down the road. I know you wanted me to come in." And so it's mapped. It's like a neighbor burglarizing, essentially, acting like she was asking for it. So it maps sexual violence, but it does it in a way where people can laugh, but then also go, "Ooh, hold on a second. What does this sound like? What does this feel like?" And so for me, a lot of my healing was in very much refusing to be silenced anymore. So when my agent told me to stop talking, I was like, I'm going to talk more. And I wrote op-eds for the Wrap, and I wrote op-eds for the Independent, and I did press conferences, and I tweeted up a storm, and I wrote everything I write. And this has always been true. Like even to the point, I'm bisexual, as I think you mentioned in the intro. I only came out a few years ago. So I came out as a full-blown adult, married to a cishet guy for a long time. Um, and I looked back at a lot of my feature scripts and my pilots and stuff, and I was like, huh, I kept writing bisexual characters were sort of my avatar in the script. That's interesting. And so everything I write comes from my lived experience, conscious or subconscious. And so, I very consciously now am making sure that like when I write things, I'm writing what it's like to be a woman in the world. And for me, that means having a lot of experience with sexual violence. And it means having a baked in fear that then does get in the way a lot of the time of the life you want to live. Like I said, before Harvey, I had already dealt with sexual harassment and sexual violence, but I was still pretty fearless. And like, I went to Europe alone and I like met strangers. And Tristan and Kelly is quite a lot about that, especially if you watch the short film. And it's this thing of like, suddenly I don't feel safe in the world. And so having conversations in the middle of a rom-com about like how the guy just did something that was really rape culture and like getting called out for it, you're not going to see that in every rom-com that you read, right? Or watch, but it's going to be in mine. And so a lot of it for me is finding ways to express and exercise what I've been through my writing, through my performance, through the way I interact with the world. I often talk about how like sometimes I regret coming forward because there's been so much harm to my life and my career from it. But I know if I hadn't, I think it would have been more painful for me to sit there and watch people talk about it and watch people find community and not be able to raise my hand and like share my own story. And my advice for survivors is there is no right or wrong way to do this. If you want to make a police report, go for it. If you don't do it. If you need to just put your head down and move forward and put it behind you, that's fine. If you need to spend time really working through it, that's okay too. And sometimes working through it looks like finding a therapist. Sometimes it looks like going to a trusted friend or family member. Sometimes it looks like journaling. There is no one way through this. There is no one path. Healing is not linear, and survivors are not a monolith. So a lot of people probably look at me and go, she's so healed. She's so on top of this. She's done so much work. I have done so much work. I'm not healed. I'm not okay. And I might not ever be okay. And that pisses me off, but it's also all right because it's not my fault. I did not do this. I did not choose this. I am the victim of many violent crimes and violent acts. And I don't think we should expect people to come out of that unscathed. I don't think we should have an expectation for people to heal or be okay or like be role models for us or show us the right way to do things. I think it's great that we share our experiences and share what's worked for us and share what hasn't. Like for me, I'm like very good at therapy. I'm very intellectual and I'm very logical. And so I still do talk therapy, but it doesn't really help me. The thing that helps me most is somatic therapy. My trauma is stored in my body. I need to get into my body and I need to work through that in a very gentle way. And I tried EMDR and it was too intense at first. And then so I found a practitioner who does like a combination of things and is very responsive and doesn't do things just like one way, really bases it on each client. That's been very helpful. Having these like tools, also realizing that I'm for sure neurodivergent and not like, this is another thing. We talk about the mental health damage, but in a lot of ways, for me, I won't speak for other people. The only mental health, like the primary mental health condition I have is PTSD, CPTSD to be specific. And actually, it's an acquired neurodivergence and it's a traumatic brain injury. It's a brain injury, right? And so one of the reasons it's so treatment resistant is because standard methods of therapy don't typically work very well for it. And so there's like, there's also a lot of misconception around these things and about what we're going through. And it's not like, oh, we're just emotional messes. Like we all have mental health challenges. We should definitely get help for that and work through it. But a lot of what is recommended is not always like the finish line. It can be a starting point. I still call hotlines. I still call like rescue hotlines because there are times where I'm just spiraling and it's 2 in the morning and like I need something to bring me back into my body and bring me back to life and back to a grounded reality. But for me, I also know like there's a limit to that. It is helpful to a point, but it's not going to solve the long-term problem. So it's about finding what works for you in the moment to keep you here, to keep you safe, to keep you present, but then finding the next thing and the next thing. And like for me, I also realized that like helping other people was really important. So when I started talking publicly about the fact that I was dealing with retaliation, that's when I started finding out that this was happening to a lot of other people. Um, Oscar winners, people who are just starting out, writers, PAs, catering, actors, all sorts of people in all sorts of ways, explicit and implicit. And as I was hearing these stories, I realized that I had really clear ideas for how to change this, how to fix this. Not just the idea of like opening doors for survivors and making sure that they had fair opportunity and equitable access to opportunity, but also how to create a more equitable, more safe, more respectful work environment for everybody. And that's how Hire Survivors, the nonprofit that I run, came about. And I would like workshop publicly. What should we call this thing? Hire Survivors Hollywood, Hollywood Hire Survivors. What like we, I was tweeting stuff and I wasn't getting a ton of engagement on that part of it, but I was getting a lot of engagement of other people who had been through this. And I had the opportunity to start working with Time's Up. Again, came from me being really outspoken about being upset with Time's Up. They I think it came about very organically and it became this big, powerful thing. And they were getting a lot of money and they were clearly using our names and our stories to do that, which is fine. But then I felt like they weren't really doing anything to help that community. And then they put out what really pissed me off is they put out like an anniversary video. I think it was the 1 year anniversary, maybe the 2 year anniversary, and like not a mention of a Weinstein survivor anywhere in it, not a like nowhere. And I tweeted about it and then it got covered in the press. And to their credit, Time's Up Entertainment DM'd me and went, hey, you make a lot of really good points. Would you be willing to have lunch with us? We want to talk. We want to apologize. And I'm always open to that. Like, I think there are some people who probably think people like me are like really dogmatic and really inflexible and really punitive. I'm not. I think people can change. I think institutions can change. But in order to do that, there has to be actual accountability and taking of responsibility and actual like repair done to the harmed community. So they asked me if I would come on board and be part of this like safety committee they were building with survivors. They asked me for recommendations of other survivors to bring in, people who weren't necessarily famous and high profile. And so I worked with them for a while and I spent a long time pitching these ideas to them. And after about a year, I made my final big pitch and they went, this is amazing. This needs to happen. Unfortunately, we don't have the time, money, or resources. So you're going to have to do it on your own. And I was like, well, I don't have the time, money, or resources, but okay. And again, it was a blessing because they imploded as an organization. I don't blame the people who I was working with directly, but leadership at the top was compromised. They didn't do anything when there were reports about sexual violence happening from people who were involved in Time's Up healthcare. People on their board were advising Cuomo about how to get out of his accusations. It was a mess. They did an internal investigation and they don't exist now, right? And they shouldn't, that they weren't able to do the repair. Time's Up Legal Defense Fund does still exist because it was always a separate entity. But I'm really grateful that the work I created lives with me and lives with this organization. It's been challenging. It started out really as like a educational initiative. We didn't formalize as a nonprofit until a few years in because I didn't know if we should be a for-profit business, a nonprofit business, if we should just continue to spread information online. But we realized very quickly that we were having a very, very outsized impact for a very small thing. And we started by consulting with independent filmmakers about how to include survivors and create safety. We created this toolkit. It started out as, I think, 22 pages. It's now 34 pages. It's free. It's an industry first, and it's been very helpful. So now we are a fully fledged nonprofit. We have two divisions, Hire Survivors Hollywood and Hire Survivors Broadway. We do this creative consulting for screen projects, theater projects. We have consulted with journalists. I have gone and given 3-hour presentations to law enforcement in Fort Worth, Texas, to lawyers in Chicago, to business leaders in Chicago. Our goal is for this to be everywhere in every industry. We have a fiscal sponsorship program now, which I think this might be like the first official public announcement of that. We sort of soft launched it in our community. But if you're a survivor, or if you're telling a survivor story, or if you have a creative project that has survivors in positions of leadership, or if you just want to commit to our mission of like hiring survivors and creating safety and equity, you can apply for a fiscal sponsorship. You can email hello@hiresurvivors.org to get more info. I think we've approved 8 projects now across screen and theater in New York and LA and all over the place. And we provide free media training to survivors, the thing I needed and did not get. And whether you're planning to go to the press or just talk to a family member and want to be able to find your narrative through your story that feels safe and a way to talk about it safely, we will help you. We'll help you learn how to advocate for yourself. We do so much. We have a survivor talent database where if you work in any capacity in the entertainment industry, or a photographer, or an assistant, or an actor, want to be in the entertainment industry and identify as a survivor, you can join the database, and it's not searchable by our partners. It's completely opt-in, consent-based. So we like send out job notices essentially to everyone in the database in a BCC form, so nobody else has anybody else's contact information. And then people can look at the attachments, look at the project, look at the pay, look at the dates, and decide if they feel comfortable and safe submitting. And they do. And most of the time, most of the projects hire survivors. The majority of them, I'd say about a quarter of open positions go to survivors. And it's incredible. It's just like amazing. And we are way too small and have not enough money. And so we need donations and we need sponsors and we need all that stuff, but we're not letting that stop us. We're consulting on like 5 projects right now. We consulted on a very big studio project that came out and made $400 million. And it's been good. We need more of those. We need more of those clients, but it's amazing. And I always say, like, if it was just my career that got ruined, I would not have started a movement. But because this is a problem, I did. And what's beautiful about it is when you try to do things to make things better for survivors, you help everybody on a project. So yes, we encourage people to open doors to survivors, but when we do that consulting work, when we're looking at a project from development through release, we're helping the filmmakers and the producers and the studios to avoid controversy and problems and expensive work stoppages and having to hire crisis PR. We are helping the cast and the crew and the creative to feel more respected and safer on set. Like these little things I have, like we set up wellness spaces where people can come and like grab a stress ball, eat a sour candy, scan a QR code with some somatic resources or reporting tools, talk to us, laugh, remember that like they're human beings outside of this 12-hour workday. It's transformative work. And I really think it's a new model for how to conduct business. And I think it is beneficial to every single person. I know it's beneficial to the bottom line. And I know that survivors are benefiting from it. And so is everybody, and especially marginalized folks.
If I can hop in here just
Yeah.
for a second, first of all, I'm speechless, first of all, because it's not very often that this happens. But one of our collaborators, and I sat down and interviewed her for a good 2 hours. Celine Beth Olson is a true crime.
I love Celine.
I'm literally obsessed with Celine beyond belief. One of my biggest, sheroes, and a huge shout out to her. But she just became a mental health coordinator
Yes.
and went through that training. It's a lot of the similar things of what you were stating. And I believe having a mental health coordinator on set, specifically for people who have lived through trauma, who are survivors. And I wish it was around a lot earlier than it is now, but I'm glad it's here now, to prohibit a lot of what Celine has faced in the industry. She's faced a lot of racism. She's faced a lot of misogyny because the entertainment industry, and this isn't to say the whole entire, I always say don't hate the people, just hate the industry. It's a similar thing of like the healthcare industry. Like we could sit here and say, oh, this nurse was terrible, but they're 9 times out of 10 they're doing their job because they're told to do that, right? You have a charge nurse, and then it goes down this chain of command. Gwen, I know you can talk about this from like the music perspective. You've been ostracized by a lot of the mainstream like country artists because, oh, you talk about abortion rights, you talk about this, you talk about that, you're not country enough, you're not this, you're not that. And as somebody who has like that healthcare background, I can just speak from the healthcare background. But my partner is transgender and was working in the pharmacy at a big box store, CVS. That's a whole nother like conversation. But to come back to my original point, mental health coordinators are so incredibly crucial. And there's also like intimacy coordinators, especially for like those scenes that, tend to be a little sexual, making sure that consent is obviously implied, like there's a lot that goes into those too. So I think, and oftentimes people have like the dual accreditation or, they have
Yeah,
like a dual.
I can speak to that a bit. So I'm
Yes.
halfway on my way to being certified as a mental health coordinator. Um, Association of Mental Health Coordinators do the
Hmm.
certification. They're great people,
Hmm.
great collaborators of ours. When we worked on that studio feature, we brought in a mental health coordinator that was recommended to us named Michelle Back. Her company is called Calm on Set, and she was great. And what we do, whether we have a mental health coordinator or not, is essentially, some of what we do is along the same lines as what a mental health coordinator does. And mental health coordinators are not there to be a clinician, right? They're not doing intake, they're not doing treatment, but they do serve as a way to help facilitate support. And sometimes that looks like making sure people have resources if they need to make a report about something or get some additional support outside of the work environment. Sometimes that looks like, talking to people and giving them tools to get into the character, get out of the character, especially if you're working on activating material. I also want to say very clearly, like the work I'm talking about is not only for and should not only be for quote unquote issues projects. Making a film, doing theater, working in any environment is stressful in and of itself. So what we do when we're consulting is effective and useful and transformative, whether you are making an action film or a movie about sexual violence or a buddy comedy or a children's movie. It doesn't matter. People need support. They need to feel respected. They need to feel like they're taken care of. Intimacy coordinators are now, I'm so happy, unionized with SAG-AFTRA in the United States. I actually was I'm on a lot of committees. I'm also on the LA local board for SAG-AFTRA. And before I was on the LA local board, in my position as the chair of a subcommittee about intimacy coordinators, I had to listen to all this information from legal folks within SAG-AFTRA when they had explored unionizing intimacy coordinators. And there was a conversation about like, should they be unionized? Should they organize with IATSE, which is crew, or should they organize with SAG-AFTRA? And I had to listen to it. I was very agnostic going in, and I made a report saying that I felt that they should unionize with us, and here's why. And that was taken to the national board, and that started the process of them getting unionized with us. So it's incredible. And they are advocates for the cast. They make sure that, what has been agreed to is held to. They have conversations about like boundaries and consent, what they're comfortable capturing, what they're comfortable doing. And they serve an incredibly important purpose. We work really closely with them. When we do our work, we do not replace any existing positions. We don't replace any existing departments. We sort of consult across, give best practices. We give advice. Ultimately, the producers still have the final say. We very luckily have like a culture clause in our contract. So, if a bright line is crossed, like let's say a project just goes, you know what? We're halfway through development and we're so excited. We're moving into pre-pro and we have a talent attachment. We are attaching Kevin Spacey. At that point, we would go, we'd advise you not to. We'd talk it out. If they were still insistent on it, we'd go, look, we wish you the best, but this is no longer a cultural fit for us. And we break ties. And that's fine. That has never happened. I think typically if a project is working with us, they understand where we stand on that. And what's beautiful is that we can be working on a project over here and like they're on board with everything. And then maybe that company over there is still maybe working with somebody who's been accused of abuse, right? That's going to happen. There's going to be this period of time where things transition and things change. And what is beautiful is we're able to get inside of things and show a new way to do things. We're not punitive, right? We're not saying, oh, punish this. We're just saying, look, we need to create safety. We need to be respectful of survivors. We need to make sure that your work environment is functional and safe. And we're not going to work on projects that have known abusers on them or bring known abusers on. But other than that, like let's make something together. We really help protect the creativity of the project too. We want to foster that creativity. We want to protect the creative vision of the artists and the filmmakers and the theater makers. And that's what we do. And, there's another coordinator that you didn't mention, Zachary, which is access coordinators who make sure that sets or theaters are safe and accessible for everybody. I think people hear that and they assume it has to do with only people who are disabled. It's not true. First of all, 25% of Americans are disabled. It is one of the only, if not, one of the only marginalized identities that anybody can become a part of at any time. Most people in their life will be disabled, whether it's a permanent disability or a short-term disability. Like even, let's say you're pregnant, you have certain access needs that you might not need when you're not pregnant. Somebody who's low vision will have different access needs than somebody who is deaf or hard of hearing, somebody who's like me, who has dynamic disabilities. I'm an ambulatory wheelchair user. Most of the time, I'm not in a wheelchair. Certain circumstances, like airports and theme parks, I need to use my wheelchair. And when I'm on set, like I need to have chairs around. I can't stand for long periods of time without possibly fainting or possibly getting injured, right? So having access coordinators means that they like, I don't want, I may get some things wrong because I'm not an access coordinator, but they like check out the environment, they find where there are accessibility issues, they make sure that everybody on the set has had an opportunity to talk about their access needs. I'm really proud 2 of our contracts now at SAG-AFTRA, our net code and our commercial contract have clauses in it where the employers have to contact everybody who's been hired after they've been, made the offer to ask them if they have any access needs. So they're not making assumptions about who is and who isn't disabled, who does and doesn't need accessibility options. So I'm really proud of that. And I'm hoping we get it into all of our contracts because that's the thing. We just have to normalize our experiences as human beings. We have to normalize our identities and we have to make things safer and more equitable for everybody. And I say safer because I don't really believe in safe spaces because safety is a moving target. Safety looks different for everybody and safety looks different for different people at different times. So what we can do is try to create as much safety as possible and be responsive, not reactive. If something happens that feels unsafe, if somebody feels unsafe, somebody feels like they don't have what they need to feel comfortable and saying something and they need to know who to go to. And so taking away the stigma around that, even there are directors who are like, no chairs on my sets. We got to be focused on work. And I'm like, you can't be focused on work if all you can think about is I'm about to faint or my feet feel like they're falling off. Like people need a second to be a person, And I'll say like she said was great about that with me. They had mostly female department heads. We didn't officially consult on that, but they did listen to me and take advice. I mean, I'm in that film because I cold called Universal to tell them about hire survivors, not to pitch myself as an actor, but to say, look, there are a bunch of Weinstein survivors who are acting and who are having trouble, and you should call them in. I know you're probably mostly cast, but you might have some roles left. And they called about 20 of us in. I didn't know they were going to do this. I happened to be one of them. I happened to be what they were looking for Emily Steele and like kind of looked enough like her. But they were great. I had my own wardrobe person assigned to me. She had my comfortable Birkenstocks, and between takes, she would change me out of my heels and put my Birkenstocks back on and made sure there were chairs around. I was getting wired for sound, and it was a man who was the sound guy. My customer said, "Hey, would you prefer me to put the wire down?" Like they were very thoughtful. They had a mental health professional on call that we could call on the phone. So there are productions who are already trying to do things right. And I'm really hopeful about that. I obviously hope that all these productions hire hire survivors to do this work. We put that money back. We kind of function on a Robin Hood model where the larger projects allow us to continue to work on the smaller projects. And it also helps us to build out our programming and hopefully, hire staff so we can do more. But even if you're not going to hire us, please look at our free toolkit. Please try to integrate these new ways of doing things. It will make your job easier as producers. It will make your life on set happier. It will make your workers happier. And it will also create trust with your audience, brand loyalty with your audience. It's good free PR about the positive work you're doing to actually take care of the people who work for you. That's a big deal. And we can also come in and like train your HR department. And we can do all sorts of things. And there's a lot of good to be done. Hire mental health coordinators, hire access coordinators. You have to hire intimacy coordinators now. Hire us. Like, do the things that mean your life is going to be easier. And also you're doing things that make the lives of everybody you're working with easier. Sorry, I could talk about this forever. I'm sure I just like rambled for 20 minutes, but
No,
so
no, I think our listeners are going to really, this is such important information. I've learned so much. Your story is an amazing example of re-empowering yourself and, turning what happened to you into something that's going to help and is already helping so many others and inspiring others. So thank you for all of that. And so, again, if anyone's listening, it's Hire Survivors. And if anyone wants the toolkit link, they can go to
yeah, so
hello, or you go ahead. Yeah.
so the toolkit is so we have three websites. If you go to hire, and it's HIRE. Sometimes people think it's HIGHER. It's HIRE. So if you go to hiresurvivors.org, it's like a portal, and you can either click on Hire Survivors Hollywood or Hire Survivors Broadway. But you can also go to hiresurvivorshollywood.org/toolkits, and you can download that free toolkit. You can scroll on the website and look at it. You can learn about on the main page, there's like a menu. You can learn about our database and how to join it. You can learn about our consulting. Again, we don't have any information about the fiscal sponsorship up, but if you email us, we will send you the application. We'll send you the information. And I don't know, maybe I'll get my stuff together enough that by the time this comes out next week, we'll have the page up on our website. But if anybody wants to donate to us, they can, or if anybody wants to volunteer to help us run our website and fundraise and write grants, any of that stuff we're open to. But yeah, there's so many free resources available to not just survivors, but anybody who feels like they might benefit from the work that we're doing, anybody who's making film or theater. We are going to have a theater-specific toolkit coming out in the coming months, so keep an eye on that. And if you ever have ideas, like the reason we have a fiscal sponsorship program now is because our community told us they wanted one. And we looked into it and we went, yeah, this is something we can do. We can help support these projects, help them raise money through donations rather than a traditional investor model or in addition to a traditional investor model. And some of the money goes back into the org and it's beautiful. Like we're so excited. There's a play running in LA right now called Reverie. That's a fiscally sponsored project. There's a play starting in New York in a couple of months called The Whippoorwill Calls. There's a short film called Green Ribbon filming in New York. There's a feature that's going to be going into production, I think, this year or next year called The Romantics. Like there's so many great projects. All of them have survivors involved. I'm just thrilled about all of them. There's a documentary called A Thin Line Between Love and Affairs that we just brought on as a fiscally sponsored project. I'm so proud of all the artists in our community who are really like doing stuff for themselves and going, my voice matters, the stories I want to tell matters. I don't want to leave any out. You're Killing Me. That's a web series. That's another one that we fiscally sponsored. And that's like dark and funny and not necessarily obviously connected to our mission, but definitely connected to our mission in the way that they're making their art. It's just great. I'm so humbled by the fact that there are people who saw what I was trying to do and said yes to it. Like Women in Film and Reframe really understood what we were doing early on. Reframe also hosts our toolkit and really encouraged us to make one. And, we're building a partnership with like New Filmmakers Los Angeles. And we did this really cool thing. We collaborated with a website called Does the Dog Die? I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it, but I've used it for years. It's a website, it's user generated, where people can talk about the triggers that are in movies and TV shows. So does the dog die, right? And then the audience answers yes, no, and you can add your own categories. So Flash Q, which is this great company that does trigger warnings about like flashing lights in live theater, Hire Survivors Broadway and Does the Dog Die teamed up to create the same thing on their website, but for live theater. So now you can go and put in user-generated information for like a show you see on Broadway or a national tour or a local theater. And I'm just so thrilled about it. So all these people who believe in what we're doing, Lionsgate invited us to come to this event recently called their Storyteller Summit. And we got to bring a cohort of like 11 survivors who, it's lovely to see companies acknowledging this group of people as a protected class. And we got to learn how things work inside the company and meet the chairman and talk to other aligned organizations and aligned artists. So the movement is growing, the momentum for it is growing, and yeah, it's just great. This will come out after, but we're doing an event tomorrow in LA. There's this amazing women's club called the E-Bell that's been around for over 100 years. And they're hosting us to do like a fireside chat. I'm being interviewed about our work and hopefully introducing it to their community. So on the days where it's hard, and there's a lot of days where it's hard, I try to remind myself of the impact we've had and the momentum that we have and the support that we have. And even coming on it, like you all do such amazing work. Your social media presence is so important. And the fact that you wanted to talk to me and wanted to talk to me about what I'm doing and about Hire Survivors, like it really is humbling and encouraging to me. And I'm so grateful.
Well, we feel the same way about you. And I mean, the impact you're having, it's obvious, it's incredible. And, again, how do you sleep, right? You're doing so much. But it's again, when we started this interview, we talked about how multi-talented you are, and again, how you've taken what happened to you and just giving back to the world is so important. And you're making me think, man, I need one of these for the music industry, and here in Nashville and LA and New York, all over.
Gosh,
So see, you're inspiring.
yeah, you can be my co-lead on Hire Survivors Music or Hire Survivors Nashville or whatever we want to call it. Let's do it.
That'd be amazing. I'm serious. Like, I think that's something we honestly need. There's tons of survivors in the music industry, as I'm sure you know. Um, yeah, and thank you so much for being here. And you've covered pretty much everything. I just have a couple more questions, and I'm going to throw it back to Zachary. Um, so my last two questions for you are, if you could tell your younger self one thing, what would it be and why? And then, you've covered a lot of what you're doing right now, but and if you've already covered this, feel free to not answer, but what is next for Sarah Masse?
Oh boy, what would I tell my younger self? Um, don't let the bastards get you down. Um, don't don't stop speaking up. I don't think I need to tell her that. She didn't. She never did. And yeah, I don't know. I think she did a pretty good job. I don't really think I have a lot to tell her. I mean, there's part of me that wants to go, "Oh, don't trust that guy." Don't, but it doesn't matter. Like that's a societal issue. That's not an individual problem for the
It was
people who've
part of your journey,
yeah,
as sad
and
as it is that you had to go through that. Like,
yeah.
look at all the amazing, beautiful things that you brought out of that experience.
Yeah, I mean, right now, a lot of the work that I'm doing right now is really trying to not let her down. Again, on the tough days, I feel like a failure. I feel like I haven't gotten to where she wanted to get to. I feel, I feel sad for all the lost time. And so I try to do things that will make her feel joyful. I mean, it's like, I have a lot of pink in my house because it makes me feel happy. I still have toys. I go to Disneyland. Like, I try to stay connected to that hope and that joy and that playfulness because I'm doing all of this for her. She's the one who got me to this point. She's the one who gave me these dreams and gave me this hope and had that. Like, she did not care. It's so weird to talk about myself in third person. I didn't, I was miserable when I was in school. I was bullied so badly and I was so sick and I was so sad, but like it wouldn't keep me from speaking up when I saw somebody else being treated unfairly. It wouldn't stop me from standing up for myself. It didn't stop me from singing really loud in music class. Like ultimately what mattered more to her and I think still what matters most to me is like being authentic and vulnerable and honest and doing the right thing, not the easy thing. And I think my life would have been a lot easier in a lot of ways if I had focused more on what was going to be better for me in the moment or might advance my career or, but I don't want to be that person. I'm not competitive. I don't want to be competitive. I'm not inauthentic. I don't want to be inauthentic. And it's not right that life is harder for people who take that path, but most of the time it is. And so I want to see the world change rather than see individuals have to like dim their light to conform to what the world wants in order for them to get to have the comfortable, happy, exciting lives that they want to have, you know?
You're talking about this, and I've been going through, a lot of my own healing with my inner child, and you talking about your inner child yourself as, in the third person, like brings tears to my eyes because I'm also doing that, what
Yeah.
would make her proud, the the experiences that were like stolen from her,
Mm,
right? Like how can I make my life the most fulfilling now? But which is what we were starting to talk about at the beginning of the episode, yeah, it's just so beautiful what you said. And oh, thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you.
yeah, thanks. Gosh, I got choked up there a minute too. And
Me too.
what's next for me? Gosh, I don't know. People listening can tell me what's next for me if they want to hire me for something. No, I have mentioned I mentioned those two films, Mother Trucker and Tristan and Kelly. We're actively looking for investors for both of those, and I've got great producers on it. So hopefully that will be coming about soon. And there, I mentioned that I'm attached to this Broadway bound musical. It's called The Right Girl, co-written by a fellow Weinstein survivor, Louisette Geiss. It's an incredible show. I've been lucky to be a part of it since basically day one. They did this wonderful thing where they brought about 24 survivors together in New York and LA and had them talk about their experiences with the producer and the director and the writer. And we're all story contributors now. We all have contracts, and when the show opens and makes money, we will get a portion of those proceeds. And I did the thing at that first meeting where I said to the producer, "Hey, you probably don't know this, but I started out doing musical theater. I'm a really good singer, really good actor. If there's ever an opportunity to audition for this, or if you need someone in a workshop, like just let me know." And they did their first table read. They had recorded demos and they did a table read in New York, and it was during the early days, maybe the first day of the first Weinstein trial, which Weinstein trial is happening again in New York right now. Jessica Mann, for the third time, is having to go through this. But I got to sit in a room with all these Broadway legends, and they asked me if I would read all of the survivor monologues, and I did that. And then they were going to be doing a workshop in LA, and the producer, Howard Kagan, called me and said, "Hey, you said you were a singer. You said you did musical theater. Do you have a reel?" I think maybe expecting me not to. I don't know. He said, "Louisette reminded me." And I said, "Yeah, I do." And I sent it over, and he called me back like an hour later, I think, maybe a couple hours later. He said, showed it to the director, showed it to Diane Warren, who has written all the musical. "You're in. Everybody loves you." And yeah, I've been a part of this cast. I did a workshop in LA. We did a Zoom workshop. We were the only equity actors working in America at the time. It was during COVID lockdown. 2 weeks on Zoom. It was incredible. I have done two workshops now in New York, like fully like up on its feet workshops with invited guests. I've been doing like the survivor track, and I've been playing different characters in the ensemble. And it's amazing because you actually have a meaty role. Like you have a name, you do monologues, you get solos. But somebody dropped out last minute during one of the workshops, and I got to do one of the principal tracks. That was very cool. I got to play the journalist again, playing a journalist, just like Emily Steele and she said. But when that happens, it will be massive. It is a big, splashy, fun musical that happens to be about sexual violence. And I, again, people invest in this. Invest in this show. It will make you a bajillion dollars. It is so good. I did this Christmas movie called An Ornament for Christmas. I'm not sure when it's coming out, but I'm really excited. I get to play basically the person who creates the inciting incident, and it's very fun. And I think I have a couple of other projects too. I'm going to be a part of this series called Falconer's Game. It takes place in DC. I'm going to play a lobbyist. It's going to be good. So, maybe I'm not auditioning as much, but there are people out there who see my worth and want to work with me. And I think we're also going to start putting out more comedy again soon. I'm ready. I got a little burnt out. I needed to focus on my long form writing for a while, but I'm ready to start doing the sketches again. So keep an eye out for that.
And when there's a will, there's a way. And Sarah
Oh yeah.
Masse makes the way happen. Yeah, it's amazing.
I am very willful. You can ask my husband. So there will always be a way.
Absolutely. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I am literally the biggest fan of you. If there was ever a Sarah Ann Masse fan club, I would be the president because that's absolutely, absolutely true. But, from the moment that I read, you mentioned whenever you were talking about your experience with Harvey, you mentioned about that two-part New York Times like article that came out. I remember reading it for the first time and thinking like the power, the energy, it sparked a whole conversation, a whole movement. It sparked like literally just these rippling things. And seeing what you're doing now, and I feel the same way about Gwen, and I feel the same way about Jess Michaels, and Marina Lacerda, the Epstein survivors. They're resilient. Forces survivors are forces to be reckoned with. And I think that's something that people need to recognize, but also understand that sexual and gender-based violence is a public health issue
Mhm.
and a public health crisis. And as soon as it is addressed as such, then we can begin our path forward.
Yep.
Until then, we're going to continue amplifying voices like yours, Sarah, like Jess, like Marina, and countless of others, because this is a community that none of us wanted to be a part of. And I know I didn't. I didn't enjoy what happened to me. I don't think anybody really does. Um, we learned about this online website, earlier this week, and deeply alarming, millions of visits to this website, and it's contributes to the patriarchy. It can, yeah, I know Gwen, you talk about this in your music sometimes. It contributes to that. And I say this as a male perspective and as a male survivor. Um, there have been times that my voice has been silenced in a lot of different spaces, but there's a lot more that welcome my voice in that space. And I've created that space to where I welcome everybody. I do not care about your sexual orientation. I do not care about your gender identity. I do not care about that. I do not care about any of that. Like I do, but as far as like hearing your voice and hearing your story and amplifying it on this podcast is for everybody. This podcast is for the people, by the people, for survivors, by survivors. It's a mixed bag of politics. It's a mixed bag. Sorry, I'm currently editing an episode too. You probably hear it in the background. I don't know if you can or not, but it's good. I'm glad. I cannot stand the sound of my own voice. Ugh.
Nobody can stand the sound of their own voice. I'm an audiobook narrator and I can't. I hate listening back to myself. Other people enjoy it apparently, but you're not alone in that.
Yeah, everybody's like, "Oh, you have such a great voice for this podcast," and I'm like, "Are we listening to the same person? Are we? Are you talking about me, little old me?"
Well, you're
Mm,
such a
that,
natural too, Zachary. So,
So
keep going.
I want to just say one thing. I would be completely remiss to not mention Tarana Burke in this conversation. I think most people became aware of Me Too in 2017. Alyssa Milano tweeted it, and it was incredibly powerful. And I think there was a big risk and a big fear that the work of a Black survivor, activist, and advocate, Tarana Burke, who had created Me Too at least a decade prior to this, was going to be erased. And I'm grateful that that has not happened across the board, but we do have these conversations. I would not be where I am today without Tarana Burke. I would not be where I am today without the work of Black and brown, usually female activists. All of my advocacy and activism work is built on the shoulders of these women who have come before me, these queer folks who have come before me, people of color, women of color. And we can't forget that. I think there was a little bit of like wanting to ignore the Weinstein story because it was a bunch, and not all, but a lot of white women. Um, Big, very valid concerns that this was going to be white feminism 101. We can't help the fact that Harvey primarily targeted white women, but it was very important to me that as I worked on my own advocacy, that we were not only centering white women. So what you were saying, Zachary, is really important. Like I always say, I've never met a survivor who doesn't have more than one marginalized identity. Um, Being a person of color, being queer, being disabled, being trans makes you much more likely to be a victim of sexual violence. And our community is very diverse, and we are very thoughtful in the fact that we always, like, unless we're talking about someone specific or a specific story, we use gender neutral language. Survivors are not just women, they're not just cis women, they're not just white women. Male survivors are out there in great number. What we know is that most sexual violence, something like 98%, is perpetrated by men, but it doesn't mean that the victims of sexual violence are only women. And so I'm really glad you brought that up. And I'm very grateful that I know Tarana now. I've met her several times, and she's a big fan of what we do, and I'm a big fan of what she does. But I just want that to be present because I think I'm grateful that the fact that our story, which happened in the entertainment industry, shone a brighter light on this and drew attention to it because everybody consumes entertainment. But it's not just entertainment. And we are not the originators of this kind of work. And now there's conversation too about like, oh, the Me Too movement's over, it's lost momentum. And Tarana said to me, like, that's when you know a movement is working, when people say stuff like that. And I think about suffrage. This going on for 100+ years. Again, was not started by white women. A lot of like indigenous women, Black women were fighting that fight. It took 100 years at least for white women to get the vote. Movements do not complete all their goals overnight. This is not going away, but it is changing, it is improving, and we will keep fighting to make these changes. I know none of us on this podcast are going to stay silent. I know none of us are going to stop doing this work. And I just wanted to jump in and say that because you brought it to the front of my mind, Zachary, and I think it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And, you mentioned about Tarana Burke. Tarana Burke, the Me Too movement is the reason that I found the courage to come forward about my story for the first time. It's because of Tarana Burke that I came forward. And, Gwen, thinking back to our original roots, we began organizing in 2024 during the presidential election and hosted a historic Zoom call. And Tarana Burke was invited and came and spoke. And whenever I tell you that was a full circle moment, and seeing her, like you receive notifications on social media. It's kind of like whenever Miss Rachel followed us. It's kind of like that similar like feeling. Miss Rachel is like Mr. Rogers of of this generation, right? Miss Rachel is a total badass human being. And whenever I tell you, I almost wrecked the vehicle, like looking at that. Or my partner was driving, and I was like, "Oh my god, dude, guess what?" And she's like, "What?" And I was like, "She's like, I'm in the middle of fucking driving," and I was like, "But Miss Rachel followed us." She said, "Are you fucking kidding me? You mean to tell me that I almost wrecked this goddamn car because like you don't understand? I grew up with Mr. Rogers. Miss Rachel is the helper that he always referred to. Like you don't understand. Miss Rachel is like everything to me. She's my biggest role model, my biggest inspiration. What she's doing for the children that are in these concentration camps is deeply inspiring.
Thank you for calling them concentration camps, by the way, because that's
I
what
will never call it a detention center because that's not what it is. It's a literal fucking concentration camp. And the conditions in which these children are facing being kidnapped off of our streets. Sarah, I think I told you I'm a democratic socialist. I know what the fuck is going on right now. And people on this podcast are so used to me being unhinged. There's a couple episodes that are coming out later this week that I kind of pop off in a very good way. I integrated U.S. Senate candidate from New Hampshire, and we had a very unhinged conversation. And whenever I tell you, I kind of raise my voice, not at her, obviously, but definitely, definitely raise my voice a little bit. So stay tuned for that. If you're watching the video form, you see Winnie in the background of Quinn's video, and Winnie is the mascot of the movement, I guess you would say. She's definitely a big part of this movement.
She's like,
Um,
okay, mom, what are we doing? What's going on? You've been
I'm
it's
sitting
so
there
like
for a
jealous.
long.
it's
I
like,
don't have
dude,
my only animals are these. I have too many allergies. What I want is
Yeah,
a pig. One day I'm gonna have a pet pig, and my life will be
yes.
complete.
they're so cute and they're so smart.
They really are.
Unlike my poodle. Anyway, no, he's very intelligent. I joke, I talk shit about him all the time, but he's used to it. But again, Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been an absolute joy. You were so much fun to talk to. You bring this bright light, this bright energy. I'm grateful for you, and I know vice versa. We are huge fans of the work that you are doing, and however we can collaborate, however we can amplify it, please let us know. We are here to amplify the work that you are doing. And I want to say thank you again.
Thank
I,
you.
I can't thank you enough. But Gwen, as always, my friend, thank you so much for joining me and being an amazing co-host, which you were practically the host today. I was the co-host. So the roles have switched, but hey, you know what? I'm here for it. And we need to do it more often. I love hearing you thrive in these spaces, and hearing your voice is deeply important to me too. And that's what I'm here for, is to amplify the voices of marginalized communities that the mainstream and the corporate media leave out of the conversation. So again, both of you, thank you. I love you both. Please take care of yourselves, and I will see you out there.
Thanks. Such an honor.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.